Okay, so before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about a personal bugbear that niggles me, and it's a phrase that's come up, as far as I'm aware, on Facebook in the last year or so. When someone first mentioned it, I didn't even know what they were talking about. And it's an abbreviation which is UPG, and it stands for unverified personal gnosis. And what I want to say about that, I'll come to. When I was at art college in the early 1990s, there was a phase for really stupid, restrictive terminology. And I don't know where it came from, but I encountered it at art college. And this is how ludicrous it was. You couldn't say a pencil because eyeliner is a pencil. So if you wanted a pencil for doing artwork, they called it a vertical graphite applicator. And you couldn't say a piece of paper because a toffee or a sweet is wrapped up in a piece of paper. So what do you mean by a piece of paper? So we had to say an artwork support system. And so the extreme was then to draw a picture on a piece of paper with a pencil was, and let's see if I can remember this correctly, to render a two-dimensional visual stimuli upon an artwork support system with a vertical graphite applicator. What a load of bollocks, you know. And this was art college in 1991, 92. And this UPG thing to me is in that same ilk, you know, this unverified personal gnosis. What does that mean? It means that you've had a spiritual insight or a vision that is deeply meaningful to you and affects your spiritual journey and stuff, but because it's not verified, i.e. it doesn't fit in with any religious canon or established thing that was written down in the 12th century or 13th century or something, it can be dismissed. And that's what niggles me. So this unverified personal gnosis is like saying, oh, it's just your imagination. That, you know, that's all it is. It's just your imagination. And that is the biggest crime to me. I think all of us, or most intelligent people, have no interest in deceiving themselves, you know. And the key thing is, if you're doing psychic things or visionary things or shamanic things, and you're trying to perceive insights from the other realm, however you comprehend that, it's via the imagination. The imagination is the bridge to visionary insights, you know. So I think what's wrong with UPG is it's dismissive almost, you know. And really, so long as we're real and honest and true and happy to laugh at ourselves and all the rest of it, you shouldn't be hindered by using your imagination. Your imagination is so important. It's the bridge. So that was my little thing there about that. Now, you can't do magic of any form without your imagination. You can't create artwork or music or poetry without imagination. Imagination is brilliant, you know. I think it was the Celtic scholar Caitlin Matthews said that sight is the faculty of the eye and that imagination is the faculty of the soul. And that's just incredible. And it's, you know, children with invisible friends are dismissed and so it's just your imagination or whatever, you know. Anyway, we must embrace imagination with all of the perilous pitfalls that it can bring and stuff, but the alternative is to be dead, to not use your mind. You know, what is the alternative? There ain't one. So to use the Ogham as a way of working with an inner grove, of course, requires the imagination, you know, in a very deep way. And I'll touch on that as I carry on talking, but I'll tell my own little journey, if you like, just to get into it so that you know where I'm coming from and what led me to my own unverified personal gnosis. When I was about 20 years old, I was living on the Isles of Scilly on the island of St. Mary's, and I was already interested in anything that was paranormal or the occult and whatnot. I was a very hungry brained 20-year-old. I started reading UFOs and paranormal things at about 14 years old, you know. So by the time I was 20, I'd read the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and things like that. And I was lucky enough to meet a chap on St. Mary's who was older than me, but probably younger than 30. But he taught me the runes. And for me, it was a very magical time sitting on the coastline of St. Mary's Island and being taught how to read runes by someone. As back in that day, you know, there was no internet or anything. It was difficult to find connections with other people. And that had a huge impact on me. But also throughout the 1990s, I read a book when I was about 15. So that's the late 80s. And it was called The Green Stone. And it's a psychic questing book. And this phenomena of psychic questing really appealed to me. And throughout the 1990s, I got very involved with the main people that were doing psychic questing. Simplistically, that's not a belief system, it's a methodology, and it's simply a way of taking psychics or empathic people out of a seance room and into the landscape. So you would go to a stone circle or an ancient site like a waterfall or a castle or an old manor house or whatever, you know, but you're there and there might be, say, 4, 5, 6 of you, and you're all tuning in, meditating to that place. And what's interesting in that kind of scenario is, say there's 6 of you, 2 or 3 people might pick up the same information. And that's really intriguing because that's not unverified personal gnosis. That's 3 pineal glands picking up on the same thing, you know, so there's something else going on there. And with psychic questing, when you do that regularly, a story usually unfolds, the history about such and such a house and the people that lived there, and then you can go to the library and check it out and so on and so forth. But one of the things that came out of that whole background was literally just being in landscape and connecting empathically with your imagination as a bridge to the spirits of any given landscape, Lake District, Wales, Cornwall, wherever. And, you know, you start picking up on intelligences, that the land carries memory, that there are spirits of a place. And what is that? You know, so then you can, again, go and check out, is it the ghost of someone that lived there in the 1600s? Is it a thought form that's being projected onto that place by occultists in the 1800s? Is it some old Celtic god or goddess? That there's so many things that could be there as a thought form, energy, spirit, whatever you want to call it, you know? So the reason I'm saying that is so that you, with my own journey with the Ogham, if I start talking about spirit of place and things, you can kind of see where I'm coming from, even if you think it's just my imagination, you know. So that was pretty much all of the 1990s for me, 10 years or so of psychic questing. And then the 2000s, I moved to Glastonbury and I got involved with something called the Glastonbury Zodiac, which again is sacred landscape, and this idea that a woman came up with in the 1920s that the signs of the zodiac were represented in the land. be that as it may, it was a good excuse to spend over 10 years mucking around in a large landscape where there's Iron Age hill forts and rivers and churches and all sorts of things, you know. So had a great time. And because the general theme with that was the zodiac, there were lots and lots and lots of conversations about star law. So I became impregnated with star law ideas. So for the first decade, if you like, I'd been mucking around with psychics and spirits of place, and the next decade, learning all sorts of star law, mystery tradition, bits and pieces. And all of that swirling around in my brain, trying to make sense of things. So then after the 2000s, when it came to 2010, I had some heartbreak at the beginning of 2010 over a whatever. And my therapy for dealing with that heartache was to start whittling. And I just picked up, I mean, I painted, and I'm an artist, I paint and I draw. I've always been creative, but I hadn't really been a sculptor or a whittler, you know. And at the beginning of 2010, I was down in Cornwall and I got this little knife from a fishing shop down in Cornwall. And this, as gruesome as it looks, it's rather industrial looking, but it's become quite a sacred tool, because everything that I've whittled since 2010 is with this one knife. And so all of the wands and the whittlings and the gwithwheel pieces, they all come from that, you know. And there's a lovely quote in Ireland with Ogham, the god that invented the Ogham writing system. It says that Ogham is the father of the Ogham, and his knife is the mother of the Ogham. You know, it gives birth to all of the things. So back in the day, you know, if they were cutting an inscription into a piece of wood, it was the mother cutting the inscription into the piece of wood. You know, it's a lovely idea. So this rather gruesome looking thing has created artwork that's inspired people, and to me, as ugly as it is, it's a sacred tool now. You know, I hope I never lose it. Nice that everything I've done has been from this one bit of fishing knife from a fishing man's shop in Cornwall. For whittling, you need a good sharp blade. It's safer to have a good sharp blade. A blunt knife slips and you'll do more damage to yourself. So the process then. So round about 2014, I think, or 2013, 2014, I'd been whittling for a few years. Back in my 20s, I'd done the runes. And of course, as I was whittling, I wanted to get more and more into tree lore. And so I went to the Ogham as an exploration of tree lore. And at first I hit a brick wall. I didn't like it at first. The symbols are not easy to get on with. They, you know, the runes look like R, S, T, M. They look like the Latin alphabet almost, you know, but the Ogham doesn't. It's just slashes. And it's hard to remember what letter's what letter, you know, so that's difficult. And also in the pursuit of tree lore, I hit a brick wall. So, okay, oak is the letter D. Then what do you do with that? You know, what can you do with that really? What tree lore is that really? You know, it's not like willow, for instance. Willow is the letter S, but it doesn't tell you anything about how willow bark can be used as aspirin, or the medicines or the mythology or anything, you know. So I think first coming up to the Ogham, for many people, because it doesn't look like the Latin alphabet, it's so obscure that it's hard to get on with and connect with. So gradually I did this in my pouch of twigs. And just some of them at random there. In my pouch, I've got more than 20, and I'll come to that. But first of all, I collected 20, and dropped something there. I've got a 50p piece that I keep in that pouch because it's got Brigantia on it, which to me is bridie. So I keep bridie in my pouch as well. I did this when I collected my twigs. And it's perfectly okay to just buy a set that someone else has made if you just want to use it as an oracle for readings. And that's pretty much the first thing. But I had this chart. Each space is one of the trees. And in each little space, I wrote down where my twig came from. But that's all I was thinking. It was mainly just so I could remember where I got each twig. And it took me 3 years. I didn't do it quickly at all. You can go and get all 20 in one weekend if you want to. There's no rules on that. But I gathered them when I could find the tree that I was looking for. Some weren't so easy to find. And I also did it when I felt called to do it. So sometimes I got 3 in 1 month, and other times it would be 4 or 5 months before I got another one. So it just came gradually. And I used it in the most common way you can use it. You know, I'd pull a twig out of the pouch or 3 twigs out of the pouch and use it as an oracle in whatever methodology you want to use. I don't want to dictate a methodology, but you know, you can take ideas from rune systems or tarot systems even, you know, but I found the simplest was just 3 twigs, past, present, future sort of ideas, you know. And I came across an idea, and I can't remember where this idea came from, but someone said, if you've got your 20 twigs, if you've got your 20 twigs, you can place them in a circle and you can sit inside your own grove. And that idea really, really appealed to me. And so, suddenly this pouch of twigs was screaming to be more than just an oracle bag, you know, that come and use us. It was almost like use us, do something with us, rather than just answer your petty questions. You know, it's kind of like do something. And so then I went back to this piece of paper, and of course, what I'd written down was where each twig had come from. And it took a while to dawn on me, but then of course, you know, with sympathetic magic, imagination, or empathy, or whatever, by holding that twig, I could go back to the place where I'd gathered it. And then suddenly, in my mind, was sitting inside my own grove with my twigs around me, and each twig being a doorway back to a place, you know. And with my background in psychic questing, there's spirits of each place, you know. So suddenly it just became a bigger thing. And that was the beginning of it growing in my mind or psyche as a inner realm place, if you like, because I wasn't just pulling twigs out of a bag. I was thinking birch tree, such and such a location, and the spirit of that place in my imagination was da, 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 da. So suddenly each tree became a gateway or a portal. Now, again, you don't need to gather twigs. You could just buy a set of twigs and use them as flower essences. So you could sit in a circle of your twigs, and you could go to the oak one, and you could imagine going into an oak forest and having oak medicine that way, and all of the mythology of the oak. And you could go to a rowan tree and imagine having that medicine with the rowan tree, and walking into a rowan wood, you know. So already in your mind, you could start going beyond each tree into a woodland area of that species of tree, and whatever spirits you see connected with that. And you can do that with twigs that you haven't gathered from a special place. You know, they're just oak, holly, ash, blackthorn, whatever, you know, they're those things. And then of course, you can start playing with it. You know, you can go to the yew tree or any tree, and in a kind of shamanic way, you can go up it into the branches and the upper world. You can go down it into the roots, into the lower world, or you could just walk through a yew forest, you know, in the kind of middle world kind of idea. So already these are like very basic vision quest things that you could do that could lead on to bigger journeys, if you like. Before I started whittling, I began whittling in 2010, but in 2008, I went to some workshops that were advertised as Celtic Shamanism. And I know shamanism is a contentious word. Pure shamanism is Siberian, of course, you know, but I use it in a very general term. To me, what I refer to as core shamanism is simply any method of working between this world and the other world. Is that, you know, I'm not talking about heavy things like soul retrieval, you know, I'm just talking about having a foot in this world and a foot in the other world and perceiving what you can. To me, that's shamanism. If you're bridging the gap, and remember the bridge is the imagination, you know, so you're making that attempt to be in both worlds at the same time and walk that path, if you like. Anyway, evolving then from the pouch, in 2014, my dad started writing a book, a fictional book about Celtic mythology, but it was based on the Ogham, and I illustrated it for him over 7 years. So for 7 years, I was thinking deeply about each tree for each illustration. And around the same time, that evolved from an idea where I almost wanted to go back to the psychic questing days of working in the landscape, and the twigs weren't sufficient enough for my ego and my imagination. So I came up with this thing of stakes. So I created again. So I spent 3 years gathering all the twigs for my pouch. And then I spent another 2 or 3 years collecting 15-inch stakes, you know, and each one is its tree and each one is a certain place. So with the stakes on my own journey, there was an evolution or a certain level of maturity. I guess when I was gathering the twigs, it was a bit slap hash, happy-go-lucky, just whatever, you know. This was much more of a thought out pilgrimage to specific locations and gathering what I could. So there was a more profound thing with this, and it took a long time. And now I have all 20 stakes, and some of them are still waiting for their artwork. I haven't painted them all. I think there's 2 or 3 left that need painting. Again, because for magical tools, I do it when it feels right. It's totally subjective, you know. When it's calling, I'll do it, you know. I think there's a certain maturity in that, you know, not trying to rush everything, you know, take your time and just let it grow as well. But the idea of the stake then was that I put these little hoops on them, and I imagined, I've never done it, but I imagined them all being connected to each other by a string or a cord or something, and that they're stakes, so they could actually be pushed in the ground, and you can make a stone circle, you know, you can make a sacred circle with them, and a big enough circle that half a dozen people could stand inside, and it could be a ritual space or a sacred space, you know. So gone way beyond the pouch of twigs, you know, but I still use my pouch of twigs. But in my imagination then, and coinciding with the psychic questing background and current research that I'm involved in, I have this dream of taking my stakes up an alignment through the British Isles, and that I can plug in my sacred grove at each location along this alignment, you know, that in my fantasy that's there in the future. My son is 3 years old, and I fantasize that when he's 15 or 16, we can do that journey, and we can take this portable Owen Grove with us as a sacred pilgrimage, if you like, you know. So because gathering the stakes was a much more devotional, sacred activity. Oh, I'm missing a bit, sorry. So back in 2008, I did this course in Celtic Shamanism and learnt basic ideas of journeying with a drum and having your own vision quest and so on. Now, the system I learnt, and I think this is simple stuff for most systems really, is that if you're doing a drumming journey, the first thing you create in your imagination is a threshold. And it's kind of like the base where you begin all your journeys from. And at the end of your journeys, you come back to this threshold. It's like the first step, if you like. And then from your threshold, you can build a relationship with various animal spirits or spirit guides and stuff, and then they will lead you on to whatever adventure. But to come back to normal reality, you always come back to your threshold, and then back to being awake, if you like, you know. So the person teaching the course suggested that, you know, that your threshold can be anywhere you want it to be. It's a mental, imaginal thing, but they did recommend choosing a real world place as a visual. And so I chose this place that's special to me in Cornwall, and I've kept it. I've always used this place by a river as my threshold, and near this place then there's a stile for climbing over into the field opposite. And I don't know where it might have come from, the film, you know what, I forget what it's called. He says, build it and they will come. Is it Field of Dreams or something? But I referred to this field next to my threshold in my imagination, but it really exists as my field of dreams. And I played with it. You know, I used to playing in that realm anyway, and would often have quite a lot of upper world stuff go on in that field. And then it dawned on me when I was collecting the stakes that actually you could plant them into your shamanic, imaginal field of dreams, if you like, you know. So then I started doing that. I started, as I gathered them and painted them, I stuck them in the ground in my imagination and built this grove in my field of dreams next to my threshold. And it's that naive, you know, that simple rather. But I think the thing with the Ogham, because there's 20 of them and it takes a while to collect them and paint them and decorate them, and there's so much thought going on to that you're building up this astral realm, psychic realm, in a very dedicated, persistent, repetitive way. And it grows, it grows, it grows. And it's, for now, when I close my eyes and I go to my threshold, it's just there across the fence. It's there in the field, you know. And from that, I was able to walk around it, you know. I could literally go around the circumference of the grove to the south, and I can visualize it so well because it's a real world place as well. But I can actually stand in that field and I can look to the north and see the yew tree directly opposite the apple tree where I'm standing, you know. And it's very simple. If you've got yew and apple, summer solstice, winter solstice, and then ash and elder for the east and west equinoxes, it's so easy to plant the other four. And now I can walk around them easily. I know where every tree is, and I've watched them grown, and they do grow. And so, yeah. Another thing is, when I was doing the field of dreams thing and building that psychic grove, I was often standing in the middle of the field, looking at the trees around me and realizing that the center point was crucially important for journeying up to the upper world, or even down to the lower world ideas. That the And this is UPG, unverified personal gnosis, but for me, I needed other trees that weren't in the traditional Ogham. So I planted those other trees in the center of my grove, you know. So in my pouch, there are more than 20 trees. And I have this 21st stake, if you like. Golden heart for the center on it. And this stake is not part of the circumference. This one is in the center for me, and it's rosewood. The wild rose, the dog rose, was very important to me. For other people, a mother tree that's missing is the beech tree. So I also have beech there, but for me, the rose was really important, you know. So again, that is deviating, if you like, from traditional Ogham lore. Wild rose, dog rose isn't in the system, but it's in my grove. And I think it's important to make your grove. And that would happen by default if you collect all of your twigs from 20 places that are sacred to you, you know. Because then you're in your field of dreams or your psychic grove, and each of your trees is a portal back to that place that you gathered it from. So your own grove in your head also connects you with the spirits of the land that you're living in. Doesn't matter if it's China, Japan, America, wherever, you know. If you've made a connection with those 20 places, they're inside you. You literally have a spirit connection with your land. Now, I'm running out of time, but the third stage then was this idea that as much as each tree can be a place and a spirit of place, but also a flower essence and tree essence, or the energy of the tree, as soon as you start delving into spirit of place or spirit related to a specific type of tree, then you're in the realm of gods, goddesses, and demigods and goddesses and fairies and Celtic mythology and star lore and all that stuff, you know. Now, so from my own journey, the evolution from the stakes, if you like, which is still there, and I still have that ambition with my son to do a pilgrimage with them, but now my brain and my mind as a Druid inspired creative artist, it is a connection with the gods and goddesses and the mythologies and so on and so forth. So now, using the game of Gwithbwyll or Fidgil or wood sense, I'm gradually collecting a new set of Ogham, and they are these pieces that each one is carved into a different animal. This is my apple as a barn owl. And there's some that still aren't finished yet. You know, there's a salmon there for my ash tree, salmon of wisdom. This is a strange one. This is the ash tree, and it's a ram-horned serpent wrapped around a piece of ash for the spring equinox. This is hawthorn. I decided to think of Rhiannon, so it's a horse's head when it's done. This will be a blackbird, but it's not black yet. That's for ivy. So I haven't got all 20 yet. I've got about 9, and some of them are still in a state of whittling. So this is blackthorn, and it's going to be a crow's head. Now I leave that bit of wood there because I hold that, you know, and then I'm whittling with my knife like that, and then when it's finished I'll slice it off and so on. So that's me on the journey with my third Ogham set, if you like. But the Gwithbwyll pieces represent the 20 different gods and goddesses of my inner grove, you know. and it's up to you which gods and goddesses correspond with the trees that you have in your own inner grove. But I think, just to wrap it up, you can kind of see that this isn't to be arrogant or anything, or judgmental, but for beginners, you know, the beginning journey is a pouch of twigs. That's the first step, isn't it? You know, and then maybe the next stage is thinking about spirits of place or the medicine of trees and the lore of each trees. And then maybe the third step is building an inner grove and connecting it not just with sacred places, but a pantheon of gods and goddesses that look after you. You know, you're there in the middle and you're surrounded by these gods and goddesses. They're holding you and supporting you and stuff. And each god and goddess has an animal representation, you know, so like Ellen is a deer and Bridie is a swan. So my chess pieces or Gwithbill pieces are animals relating to those divinities, if you like. Rather than try and sculpt gods and goddesses, it's easier to do an animal. So, okay, so that ends my presentation bit. So you can turn your microphones back on. It's still recording, so the conversation we have is recorded, but you're welcome to just fire away now.
Fantastic, inspired, beautiful work. Such clarity and with such a beautiful purpose.
For me, it's a living thing, you know. And what amazes me is how the Owen Grove group has grown on Facebook, because I'm just doing what I love, really. And maybe it's cliche, but I think people resonate with someone doing what they love, don't they? You know.
Yeah. I think that's very true, Yuri. You can get a sense of someone, you know, just seeing your artwork, you know, your drawings and everything that you put on the page. And I just thought, oh, wow, there was something, you could tell that so much love had gone into it. And I think that, I don't know, perhaps you have to reach a certain level of age or maturity to be able to tell the difference between something that's been produced, which is technically perfect or wonderful, but it doesn't move you. And I think, you know, we all respond differently to different things. But yeah, when someone's passionate about it and wants to share the joy or the process they've been through, then it's naturally much more inspiring than somebody trying to tell you, okay, you have to do it this way. Okay, with some things you have to learn the basics, but then it's, and I love the fact that you said it's a living thing. I've just started doing a couple of rune courses with a chap, so he's very much message is the same. He can give you the information, but it's up to you how you use them, and they're a living thing and they should be treated with a lot of respect. And yeah, it's lovely to hear that. Thank you.
You know, the Ogham is a alphabet from the trees, and the runes are an alphabet from a tree. You know, yeah. Odin got them from Yggdrasil, from hanging there, you know, so there's this tree origin behind the runes as well, you know.
I love how you've matched the trees up with goddesses. That for me, I want to go and collect lots of things now, get traveling and collect, because I've always been attracted to that energy, the trees, but it was kind of finding a way of putting it all together. And what you've just been talking about is just, oh, it's brilliant. It just makes you want to go out.
With that, I'm very reluctant to say this god or goddess goes with this tree, you know, so because it should be a personal gnosis is what it should be, you know. Yeah. So on the Facebook group, I'm only ever sharing ideas, you know, this is how I feel about such and such a tree, and there might be some mythology to encourage that perception, but equally, yeah, if somebody says, well, no, I disagree, I think it's such and such god, well, that's fine, you know. Yeah. having a connection with the trees of wisdom and connecting with pantheons of pagan origins is where the magic's at to me, you know, and it's your grove. So it's your inner grove is what I called this, you know, so I'm only talking about how I've bumbled my own way through the forest and encouraging people to do more than just use a pouch of twigs for readings, you know, that it can be so much deeper and give you a connection with nature.
Yeah, amazing. I want to go and collect, and the thought that they're all portals as well, I'm buzzing.
A nice idea is that you don't even need twigs, you know, you could have an acorn or different seeds or dried fruits, other bits and pieces, you know, it doesn't have to be twigs, it can be something else that relates to the tree, you know. Yeah, interesting. Hazelnuts instead of hazel.
I like the idea of using the letters as something like a Reiki symbol, now that I'm starting to sort of remember basic qualities of each of the 20 trees, like calling upon that symbol in my imagination or in my mind's eye for protection or for clairvoyancy or for whatever. And we had our Grove meeting last night, and we were reading from the Weaving Word Wisdom book again and talking about the importance of how she relates musical notes to the trees and calling upon those notes. And I just had this huge like rush from my studies with the OBOD and the Kabbalah, and how it's so similar in so many ways, yet it's so beautifully simple, the Ogham, you know. But yeah, because I'm not in a position physically where I can go out and collect all of the twigs because of my health. So I collected acorns, and I wood burned the letters on the acorns, and I used those. At first I started with popsicle sticks, and I went to acorns, and then someone gifted me with some twigs. But yeah, I think that there comes a time for me, where many times actually in my illness, where I can't really do anything except envision that symbol, and it's powerful for me. Just that letter itself is a symbol.
I can't remember who it was. It was someone on the Facebook group, but they actually made a kind of rosary bead set of 20 wooden beads, each bead for one of the trees in the Ogham. So they could actually go, you know, count them as them praying or meditating, and they're going through the Owen Grove wooden beads. It was quite a nice idea.
Claire Gerard did something like that too.
Who did?
And she included little Sheila Nagigs along the rosary bead.
Claire Gerard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it Claire who did the rosary beads?
Her husband, but she incorporated them into her rosary.
Ah, brilliant.
Yeah.
What another amazing thing is, and I hope to do it here in Guernsey. I'm kind of whispering in the ear of my friends who have this farm here, but quite a few people now are planting Owen Groves, you know, they're actually doing it, you know, and that's just a mad, brilliant thing, you know.
That's great.
Yeah.
Gives me great hope.
Yeah. That's on all levels, isn't it? 'Cause it's for the environment as well. So not only is it such a fantastic spiritual thing, but you're planting trees, so you could really get that out there, you know. Brilliant.
Another thing I'm interested in the kind of vein of Reiki, I suppose, or flower essences. I have a background in Tai Chi and Qigong, and there's certain ways of standing and aligning your posture and breathing deeply, you know, having a good quality breath. But they literally use metaphors like rooting. You know, there's a way of standing and rooting to relax your spine and your energy sinking into the ground. And there's energy centers in your palms, you know, so there's enough there to put your palms on a tree trunk and breathe with the tree as a kind of I call it tree breathing, but it would be a way of getting oak essence, or just being balanced out by the energy of that tree, you know. Brilliant. It's just breath work, but understanding that. What I often think about is the original Druids, according to Julius Caesar, who wrote about them round about 50 BC, because he encountered them when he was conquering Gaul and stuff. But he actually does give quite a bit of detail about the things they did and believed in. And he actually says that it could take students 20 years to learn to be Druid. And that's a fascinating thing, especially as he also says that the Druids, they used the Greek language for trade, you know, for exchanging goods and stuff, but they refused to write anything down about their beliefs. They actually considered it would almost debase things, if you like, you know, or it stops the students from remembering properly. So if they're not writing down, this is pre-Ogham, you know, if they're not writing things down, they need memory games, you know. So there's 20 years of learning songs or poems or stories, maybe chess games, you know, that help you remember all this stuff, you know. But equally, in my imagination, they're standing under the stars and they're breathing with trees, you know, that they're having a symbiotic relationship with the trees. That takes 20 years as well, you know. So, you know, spending 3 years gathering a pouch of twigs is nothing compared to 20 years in the forest learning to be Druid, you know. So we can at least make baby steps in that direction.
There was also the Ogham sign language, so they could converse without speaking and nobody would notice.
Yeah. They have that in horse racing, don't they? The tic-tac-toe. But I mean, that sort of thing, if you were hunting, you know, you could draw your fingers along your bow and give certain commands to your friend and trying to be quiet, couldn't you? There'd be a logic to that. Another idea I had, and this was from a children's book. In the children's book, there were air balloons in the illustration, and the artist had done very big stitches for the air balloon fabric. And the stitches looked just like Ogham. I thought, oh, God, you know, if you had a ship, or if you're trading in goods and you're putting things in a sack, you could use stitches to write a message, you know, 20 apples or whatever, you know, you could put it there in stitches. And like, is it, I forget which tribe it is in South America, they tie knots in string, don't they, as a way of recording things, you know. So stitching symbols into a ship's sail is not that unusual. There's a person on the group called Cara who does lots of stitching work, and I've fascinating, you know, you could spell things with your stitches in there.
I think knots are the oldest language, if I'm not mistaken. The oldest like recorded language is done with knots.
Is it?
It's my, if I'm not dreaming that up, yeah, I believe so.
Wow.
Mm.
And you know, my local Native American group, the Iroquois, had what's called wampum, which was beadwork, and it was wealth, but it was the way they recorded their stories, their history, which was part mythology. But the wampum, you know, was made with beads, but the patterns were, you know, like Ogham, they had hieroglyphic meaning. There was the literal meaning, the poetic meaning, the you know, wisdom meaning.
But another thing that dawned on me from the writings of Julius Caesar is that he says something about the Druids counting their days from the nighttime rather than at sunrise. And we still do that. We start at midnight, you know, rather than the first sign of the sun. But what that actually is is every day of the year begins with a certain star theme. You know, we're divorced from that, like we're divorced from trees. A lot of people can't even identify all 20 trees in the Ogham. And a lot of people don't know what constellation is what constellation, you know, but back in the day, 20 years in the forest learning to be a Druid, you would know every, you know, the weeks after winter solstice, it's that star group, and so on through the year, that what I call star themed days, that your days actually begin with a star story. So then your trees in your Owen Grove and your gods and goddesses also correspond with that time of year and the stars that are in the sky before the sunrise at that time of year, you know, the star themed day, if you like, you know. So you're not just deeply symbiotic with nature and the trees and the landscape, but you're also magically married to the heavens and the stars, that the stars, so many ancient cultures are the ancestors looking down, and that connection. And relatively speaking, the constellations don't change shape in one human being's lifetime. They don't change shape, so they're kind of eternal. They're ever living things, you know. So yeah.
When you were talking about planting your stakes and going across the enchanted landscape, doing a staking ritual, I was thinking of what is called horizon astronomy. I recently read an article about the constellation Vulpecula, the fox, and they brought up this idea of the horizon astronomy, which has to do with each hour there's a different ring of constellations on the horizon, and that was very significant in the ancient world, right? There was like a ring of beings and animals around the horizon at any given hour of the day, depending on the season. And I as you were, you know, I'm thinking of you staking out your 20 stakes, like what's on the horizon would be
Yes.
an interesting correlation.
It's incredible. The Fox constellation means a lot to me, and I know these things are meant to happen at a certain time, but I lost my 11-year-old daughter 5 years ago, and friends of mine said, you know, you can buy a star, but she was very much a fox lover, so they got the star in that same constellation that you just mentioned. So I just sat there like, oh. So that was nice.
In the movie The Green Knight, when Gawain makes it to the Well of Winifred, the saint who had lost her head to ruffians and they'd thrown it in the water, and he goes down and rescues her head, or you know what is now the skull, a fox appears and goes with him through the rest of his journey and finally talks to him and gives him like the wisdom that he needs at that crisis moment where he's either going to forget the quest or achieve it.
Yeah. Thank you.
One of my favorite experiences growing up at Christmas time was we would go to my grandmother and grandfather's house and in the Ozarks in America, and all my cousins would come, and on Christmas Eve my grandmother would take us all outside and she'd put her arms around all of us and show us her star and say that was her star, and that we all have our star. And so also we were very connected to the earth as well. So it's kind of interesting to see these correlations, and it's such a full science because we're connecting not just with the Ogham trees, but hopefully anyway, for me, that it helps me to connect with all of nature and all the trees and plants and birds, and that I am a part of it, but also that you know, we're all part of the heavens as well. I used to teach kindergarten, and I had all my kindergartners outside, and I had them stand with their arms out and their legs out, and then I showed them a star, and I said, see, we are all made from stardust. And so it's a complete walk. Thank you for sharing, Yuri. It's very
Thank you as well. I'm just doing what I love. You know, that's it. You know. Yeah.
Lovely.
Um,
I think everybody's thinking about now, right, so where am I going to do this? where am I going to collect? Well, oh, I've got to get to these places now.
and things never work out exactly how you plan them as well, you know. So although I said each of my 20 stakes represents a sacred place, that's not completely true, because 2 of them I was given by 2 different people. So then I had to really sit and think about that, and what was it about those 2 people that they would gift me those pieces of wood, and that kind of stopped me going to a location to find that piece of wood. So, you know, now after a year or 2, I've kind of evaluated it and what that individual person means to me and what they represent, sort of thing, and I kind of work with it in that way. But equally, not, you know, wood is perishable. You do my best to look after it, but if wood gets damp, it can rot and stuff. And my piece of vine is struggling, and my piece of willow is struggling. So at some point in the future, I might need to replace willow and vine, you know. So that's just, again, that's part of something growing, and also part of the nature of some wood deteriorating because of a damp environment or whatever, you know. So again, it's a living thing, and you should never be stuck. You should be able to be mutable and adapt and change as well, you know. So then your inner growth isn't a rusty ruin or piece of archaeology inside you, you know. It is a living temple, and it changes as well.
Well, I think you started me off.
Yeah.
That's my first one.
Oh, well done, Kerry. That's beautiful.
No. Yuri made this.
And that would have
It's
been
beautiful.
it's a child of this, you know, from 2010, everything I've whittled, you know. And I've done a few, I did quite a few wands and little pieces of wood that I call keppens and stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? We've got 12 minutes left, so
I would like to talk about this, what's it called? Widwill. Like, do you have any intuitions about the rules or the objective?
okay,
or,
then. So you won't please everybody, of course, because no one knows how it was played. So there will be people who say that will dismiss whatever you do and say, oh, well, you know, you're just making it up.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So we can put that aside. So what we can do then is look at the mythological stories that talked about it. And we can also look at old board games that were played around that time and before, and come up with ideas. Now, I've been working with a chap called Alan on the group, and he's come up with tons of ideas, and some are 8x8 boards, and some are 7x7 boards, and some are circular boards that look like a dart board that you would throw darts at almost, you know. So it looks more like a grove because it's circular. So first of all, no one knows how it was played, but with a pack of playing cards, you can play many different games with a pack of playing cards. So, and a chessboard is almost the same. You know, you can play chess, or you can play checkers or drafts. You know, you can use the same board for 2 different games at least, you know. And so what I was saying to Alan is, look, let's have the Ogham as the 20 playing pieces, because then it's a battle of the trees. And it Gwithwill does mean tree logic or tree sense. So the Ogham is a natural choice for 20 playing pieces. And then let's come up with, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different kind of games that could be played. just like a pack of playing cards. And then nobody could say, oh, well, that wasn't how Gwythbwyll was played. And we said, well, no, but, you know, no one knows. And here's 10 different games. And I even like the idea that you could play some sort of solitaire, and that the solitaire game might be, don't get me wrong, almost like a Ouija board in the sense that it's just you interacting empathically with your gods and goddesses and stuff, you know, that you're actually interacting with the spirit world as a game of solitaire. So that's like using it as an oracle or something, or just
I mentioned that chess can be and I mean, I wrote this to you, I think, that chess isn't just about crushing the opponent. Chess can be like two ambassadors come from two countries and they play chess to get an idea of like, what is going, you know, what is your intention? Are you working with knights or with bishops?
Yes.
Are you sending out rooks, knights? You know, and all of this is like an idea, a way of delicately talking about what is our intention here. You know, are we preparing your country so that our queen can come in big regalia, or are we sending out knights because we're planning to plant rooks and castles on your land?
Another thing with Gwythbwyll in medieval stories is that it is always paranormal. It's never just a game. There's a story in the Mabinogion called The Dream of Rhonabwy, and in that King Arthur and Sir Owain are playing the game, and all sorts of paranormal things are happening as they're playing the game out.
I think that's what wood means, right? Wood is the paranormal.
Yeah,
I mean, that would, to me, that's what the wood would mean, is that we're dealing with the other world, and here's a way to strategize and understand something.
Just like in that Gwyn book, you know, the word Hud, H-U-D, hood, it's the same. It means enchanted or paranormal is what it means, you know. Yeah.
Is that Robin Hood? Is he possibly like H-U-D, Robin Hood?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. Wow.
I can't prove it, but it's something I'm looking into.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. The
Yeah.
green man incarnate.
Yeah. And again, battling in the forest, aren't they? You know, it's the same stuff.
In the early 1970s, I had my first like authentic vision, and I was looking at a pond with the sun setting, and then I sank below the pond and I was in a forest where the trees were stone, and down these long paths. I mean, like they seemed like they went on forever. In any direction, there were these long paths between the pillars that were stone trees, but there were knights in these living colors, like, you know, like red was a living color and blue was a living color and green was a living, like a whole Ogham. And they were in these eternal battles. They weren't necessarily going to ever resolve the conflict, but the meaning of the colors were in this underground world, which was a forest made of stone beneath a water, a pond of water. Very, very, I mean, this was the vision that, you know, hooked me in the sense that, you know, like it's very easy. It's the perilous realm because you can get hooked and spend your life trying to get back there and destroy yourself.
Most of the Arthurian romances are quite paranormal and strange, really. For their day, like the 12th century and 13th century, it was the X-Files. In an era where you could be burnt for being a Cathar or something. So if you weren't a strict Catholic, you could be put away with. And all of these stories are paranormal. They're the X-Files, you know? Yeah. Really interesting, but you can kind of get away with it because it's just a story. You know, you don't have to, it's not a belief, it's a story. And but of all of the knights, Sir Gawain is the most interesting to me. Most of his adventures are to do with enchanted woodland and nature spirits and stuff. Not just
he's the heart, right? He's so much with the heart. He's an emotional knight.
Yeah. And yeah, you know, and his story with Dame Ragnell is about him marrying the sovereignty goddess of Inglewood Forest and stuff, you know,
and giving her the power.
Yeah,
rather than taking it. He returns her the power, gives her equality.
And in that story, when he first encounters her and she's this loathsome lady because she's cursed or whatever, she's sitting between an oak and a holly tree.
Wow.
So she's sitting at Beltane, you know.
Wow.
Whereas Gawain and the Green Knight is kind of winter solstice story, but Dame Ragnall is a Beltane story.
Fantastic. Wow.
And of course, traditionally, his shield is a pentagram as well.
Oh, wow. And Venus. Yeah.
He's the Ogham Knight in my head, you
Wow.
know.
Yeah.
I still have a very basic question, because you said you hit a wall when you first met the Ogham, and I still am not really connecting to the signs of the Oghams, to the trees. That's beautiful and easy, and yeah, but the signs really, they don't really speak to me. How did you do it so they can relate to you and your work?
I think they are utterly alien. And on the Facebook group, there is a free PDF file in the files section. I forget what it's called now, but there's only about 7 files, so you'd find it if you looked through them. I think I called it the Ogham Code. And I would argue that first and foremost, before the Ogham symbols were an alphabet, they were a mathematical code, that they're a numerical code. It's these 4 groups of 5 is what they are. And that in the PDF file, the Ogham code, it shows how that 4 groups of 5 mathematical code creates a year wheel. It creates the 4 seasons of the year divided by 5, you know, and that really helped for me. And also you could argue it came from both hands and both feet. That's the natural way of counting and stuff. But the formula it gives you is the year divided by 20, which is 18 degrees, and it connects with a pentagram and Venus and all of that sort of stuff. It's very unusual for an alphabet to manifest in that way. This isn't answering your question probably, but for instance, the 4 groups are called Ogham, and there's the Ogham Beath is the first one and the Ogham Oath is the second one, but they're just 4 groups of 5. But there would never have been, say, like 3 alphabet letters in the first group, and then 2 in the next group, and then 5 in the next group. You know what I mean is there was 20 right from the beginning. It didn't evolve as an alphabet of 16 letters and then an alphabet of 18 letters. It didn't evolve that way, and it didn't evolve into more than 20. From its outset, it had to be these 4 groups of 5. And to me, that suggests it's a mathematical code, maybe a tallying system for trade or something, upon which, after the numbers, letters were applied. Now, that doesn't answer your question. The symbols themselves, the slashes, you just become familiar with them with repetition. That they're not.
Yeah,
They're not.
do that, but they don't really, they don't merge together in a way. And
Yeah.
But I like the idea of 2 hands and 2 feet, and maybe I can approach it like this through my body, because this always helps me a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, I probably didn't answer that correctly or whatever, you know.
I think it's like learning your numbers or learning the alphabet. It's like at first in principle, you have to put in this rote memory period. And that's fundamental. It just has to be done. And then you expand into the higher levels of math and language, poetry, whatever.
Just doing a 3 twig spread every day could, you know, or even if you did bibliomancy, if you didn't have the twigs, you know, just to do 3 every day and write down a few little notes in your journal, you eventually would remember, or it would help you to remember the meanings. of these energies, you know. So it's helped me anyway.
The London-based artists, the Pre-Raphaelites, they had something called the language of flowers. So Burne-Jones and others, they put certain floral patterns together not because they were an alphabet, but they meant different phrases. So they kind of spelt something with a bunch of flowers. And I love that idea with the Ogham, that you don't need to use those slashes as symbols. You could actually put 6 different leaves together and spell a word if the person understands what those leaves are and what trees they came from. And I think that's really interesting that, you know, Druid types could actually leave messages with leaves pierced on a twig or something. You know, there's so much fun that could be had with it. And I think that's key to getting on with it, is to play with it.
Could it be what you interpret it as then? Could it be what energy you're picking up?
Absolutely.
Rather than thinking it's got to be by like this sign or that sign, it could be you touch that tree and it is giving you back a signal, a message, then that could be what you're connecting with. And to go with that, perhaps to start off with, might help.
There's a lot of people now on the Facebook group in different countries all over the world, and they can't access the traditional 20 trees. So they're having to create groves with their own native species. And I think that's all perfectly valid, really. You know, you can take the Irish origin and use that as your backbone, but you can adapt it to where you're living, you know, and you make it your own. I don't have any problem with that at all. And I don't think anybody should. You know, it's down to you and your own spiritual journey, and ultimately it's what it means to you. So again, why on the Facebook group sometimes there's a risk of argument about something or other, and that there is no dogma. You know, there's no dogma at all. No one can tell you you've done it wrong. No one can tell you you've done it wrong. No one can tell you it's just your imagination. You know, claim those things. Claim your imagination as the bridge that you use to do it your way. You know, that's connection. And if people take that away from you, you're disconnected. You know.
And that's patriarchy.
Yeah.
Patriarchy is the rational mind bullying the imagination, and to the point that it says you don't even exist.
Yeah.
You know, so being children, reclaiming your imagination is big. And no one of the right mind wants to deceive themselves. And, you know, you can do a shamanic quest, and I've done drumming workshops with people, and people are new to it, and they say, well, how do I know that it's not just my imagination? Well, yeah, it is your imagination, you know, and you can't deceive yourself, you know, and if you actually just relax and let 5 minutes unfold, very interesting imagery comes, you know, and work with it, you know. And I think so many people have had imagination bullied out of them because it's not part of the rational mind. You know, like Franklin calls it the perilous realm. And there is of course, there's plenty of room for delusion and everything, you know. But if you're honest with yourself and laugh at yourself, and, you know, if your psyche is telling you this,
it's filled with,
what else can you do?
the other world is filled with eternal archetypal qualities. They put on robes and become the gods and the beings of the other world. They're more like musical qualities. They're eternal, they're real, they're invisible. When they touch a mortal being, the tendency is to inflate. And this creates another peril, because now we got people out on soapboxes and people who are convinced that this star, we have to, you know, commit suicide to get on the spaceship and go. And so it's a perilous realm because of the fact that when archetypal energy touches us, we need a lot of help to keep our feet on the ground and to stay humble. Humility is the key to this other world, and it's very, very difficult.
If someone's been kind of shut off for a long time, and then they have a kind of road to Damascus moment, the ego can suddenly think that they're there for a big mission and to save the world and all the rest of it. And yeah, seen plenty of that, you know, and narcissism or
launching crusades, you know.
Yeah. And because when the doors first open, it's amazing. It's all, yeah.
We're operating on 12 volts and suddenly 7,000 volts are, you know, in the system. Wow.
So yeah, gently through the woods. One rabbit hole at a time.
I like that line. It's a great one.
Yeah.
That's a bumper sticker.
Right, we're 6 minutes over. I've got to go and get some late evening dinner. And thank you, everybody.
So beautiful, Yuri. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri.
Recording off.
Thank